Hey everyone, haven't done a woods check-in in a long time, but as it is officially winter here in Arkansas, or at least in central Arkansas, we have late fall oysters coming in. I'm talking about mushrooms. Yeah, I'm gonna show you this tree. It's been down for at least a year. That's all I can speak to because that's like as long as I've been here. It produced oysters last year and it is producing oysters again this year, which is kind of cool. As long as there is still enough food and like the starches and stuff in the wood of the tree, like the fungi still has a good supply of food to feed off of, so that it makes a good host for producing mushrooms for it to reproduce next year. Um, I don't know. It produced a couple flushes last year, and they increasingly get smaller, like the size of the flush, which may have something to do with the temperature changing, may have something to do with just like I thought it would have had to do more with them running out of food, because when you have like a fruiting block at home, that's generally the way it is. Like they're eating up all the food supply, and so they're able to put out a little less and less. At least that's what I've always associated with. But the fact that it's put out a whole new, like, full flush of mushrooms this year is interesting. So I'm going to turn the camera around, show you what is on the tree, and then kind of walk you through how I go about foraging, because, you know, there's a respectful way to do this, and it's not just for some woo-woo kind of notion of like a nonsense idea of spirituality with the land. Like, that's not what this is about. It's about sustainability. It's about having a proper relationship to the home we have that is the natural world, which is becoming more and more increasingly forgotten and undervalued. Not in all circles, but you know what I'm talking about. Metaverse. Okay, cool. I'm going to turn the camera. All right. So if you look at the area we're in, this is kind of a depression. We're in a floodplain where we are out here, and everything like going up the street and across the properties this way from where we are is all uphill. We're on a gradual slope, and it's all draining down here because back on the other side of all of this is a creek that runs through. So taking that into consideration, this little whole area, like, it's kind of a bottoms area where, you know, you're seeing all these leaves collect, which makes a really great kind of insulation for the moisture in this depressed area. It's also great insulation for moisture because during the hotter months, the canopy and tree cover through here is great. It's like borderline bog. So it will hold water during the wet months, but then as it starts to dry out through the year, all of this dries out, which makes kind of a perfect environment for a lot of types of mushrooms that we value as a human species. So if you look at this tree, it's been down. When I come upon a patch of mushrooms that I'm interested in, you don't just run in and start cutting whatever mushroom you see. You want to like kind of get a gauge of what you're working with. Like, I'm going to go to the end of this tree, kind of scope on one side, scope on the other. A lot of them will kind of be, you know, down, kind of almost pressed into the dirt sometimes. And then I'm going to also kind of scan around the perimeter of the area I'm in to see if there is another flush of mushrooms within just, I don't know, I was going to say earshot, but that's like way further away. But I mean, the point is, I'm trying to get a lay of like, how much am I working with? Because whatever I'm working with in total, I don't want to take the majority of that. I want to make sure that I leave plenty in the area, because you're trying to preserve biodiversity and like help the species propagate. Even if it's a species like mushrooms that are incredibly common and prolific, they are parasitic, but that's okay. Because it's not like they're as parasitic as like a honey mushroom or something, which, whatever, tangent. So as I'm sizing up this tree, this is the only one, like, that I know of, like right around here, that's producing. So I'm like, okay, this is the total of what I'm working with. Now I'm going to go through and kind of just make a quick scan of what mushrooms are going to be worth cutting and which ones are going to be more valuable to leave. So that I'm not like cutting ones that don't end up being that good for the quality that I need. And then I'm also leaving, like, for instance, some of these smaller pens, like here, I'm not going to cut one like that because it's for a couple reasons. It's not mature. These other mushrooms that have fanned out a little bit more, I want to cut more mature mushrooms because they've already done most of the work they're going to do. They've had enough time to release lots of spores, to come to maturity. It will probably rain today and they're going to start rotting. And the older ones are more susceptible to that rot and erosion. They're just closer to the end of their life, so they're more susceptible to it. So I want to get the ones that are like through enough maturity, but not so mature that they've already begun like degrading. So you've got buggy, mushy, nasty mushrooms. So like these ones are pretty perfect. Woo, hey. And I'm judging that by, here, I'll just take this one and then I'll show you one to compare it to. So if you look at this cap, oh, difficult to focus. I think that's a good enough model versus this one. These are just a little bit younger. These are kind of, for oysters, they're smaller. In general, oysters can get like fancy dinner plate size. Like they can get big. But if you see the edge of this cap, it's like a little more enrolled is what they call it when it's not as flexed out. Let me see if I can find a super mature one now just for even more context or contrast. So right here, this one is like, this is probably about as mature as they're gonna get before you can't really use them anymore. And that enrolled cap has started to flare out so that it almost starts tipping up. It gets a little more ruffled. And sometimes like it can create this striation on the edge. And this is specific to oysters. Not all mushrooms are going to have this particular maturation pattern. But yeah, once they start turning up, that's a mature oyster. Cut them if they're not already rotting. So I'm gonna definitely cut these ones because they're some of the largest ones out here. I'm gonna leave the smaller ones like this because they still have a lot of work to do. That one, I'm gonna leave these guys. I don't know if that was a cat or a human. Okay. I'll probably cut these ones. So yeah. Oh no, that was a human singing opera. You just never know what you're gonna encounter when you go out in the woods sometimes. Wow. I really hope y'all heard that on the video. So yeah, hold on. I'll set this up and then you guys can watch how I harvest these because there's also a technique to harvesting. Totally don't have a stand with me today. So it's gonna work. I've just like lodged this camera in the front of my overalls. All right, so hold on, let's get this one over here. This is the biggest cluster. So I want to these are going to keep better if I can harvest them all as one unit, which is going to be difficult because of the way the bark is on this tree. It's very close set, and there's this big knob right here that I'm probably going to scratch myself on if I try to get the whole thing off. Sometimes I can just use my hands and I don't even need a knife. But in this case, what I think I'm going to do, a little pre-cutting underneath because I can access them better down here. And then I'll see if I can't pull the whole thing off together. Ooh, see, I just found the main node where they're all coming out from. I have sliced the shit out of my hand before, cutting under a mushroom like this. Probably mostly because I got too excited and just like went in. There it goes. See, look at that. Oof, hold on. Yeah, so I didn't even really need a knife for that. That's a beautiful little cluster, and that's what it looks like underneath. So, hang on. free up my hands. So that was the attachment where it was coming out of the tree. Very nice clean break. It's kind of cool because it's like you can see this moisture ring right under it where it was like really holding the moisture in. And then also like where these like little whiter spots, that aren't the actual flesh, but it's where the spores and then the mycelium were spreading. There's a good little, it's hard to tell that that's the white spore print, which is another one of the indicating factors that these are indeed oyster mushrooms. They have a white spore print. But I mean, there's lots of points of identification. This is one of the easier mushrooms to learn to identify. I've definitely not told you everything about identifying them in this video if you're brand new to this. But if you are starting out, this is one of the low barrier to entry mushrooms to help you gain a little bit of confidence in the woods. I've been harvesting them for years now, which feels really cool. It's like I'm at a point where it feels like this is what I've always done, when really it was like, no, it's kind of just a few years ago that I really got into this. So yeah, I'm gonna put all the harvested mushrooms in this basket and I'll show you what I have at the end. Look at that. Woo! That's dinner for me, for a couple, well, I don't know. Mushrooms cook down a whole lot. I'd say a couple pounds of mushrooms. I'm probably going to share these with a couple of my regulars from the market that I'll be doing special deliveries of bread and granola because it's Christmas and I know they'll probably really appreciate this. Yeah. The whole thing that gave me the idea like, oh, today's a day I should definitely go look to see if some of my spots are producing, is that up on the edge of the pond, which I live like at the edge of the pond, there's like a crap ton of, I think they're the deadly, it's not the Gallerina, they may be silver tufts. It's not an edible mushroom, but it's definitely a will make you sick mushroom. So I wasn't interested in harvesting those, but there's a big enough flush of them that's like, okay, conditions are good. The mushrooms are liking things right now, or they're seeing this as a good time to produce. And not just these mushrooms I'm seeing right here, but generally that can be an indicator like they may be doing this all over the place. So definitely like the indicator that it's worth the effort to make a loop around the property and check to see if anything else is going on. And sure enough, that's oftentimes what will help me make a decision on like, am I gonna drop my plans today and go out into the woods? But yeah, here's what stuff looks like right here. Woo! Yeah, so don't mind the random table in the middle of the pond. Backwoods shit. So this pond, there used to be tons of like these saplings and everything that bordered it. It was overgrown, and then Hayden had it dug out, and everything just wood chipped. So basically, this whole edge of the pond is like a giant mulch pile. And kind of knew last year, I was like, all right, all this dead wood, this is like a breeding ground for mushrooms. Give it a year or two to start decomposing and to get inoculated. And we've had several species that have preferred the wood that's over here. I don't remember what all. I mean, probably a lot of sweet gum, but I forget what else. So yeah, these guys are going crazy right now. We had a flush of honey mushrooms earlier in the fall. Right there, if you look, there's a really nice kind of Ganoderma, but it's all smushed up. Sessile, I believe. And I've seen a good bit of sessile like out there on the other side of the pond. Yeah, so this was kind of my like heads up. So I like came out of the camper, was working on stuff, and I was like, oh shit, it's time. It's time. Once I take the mushrooms home, sometimes they need to be cleaned, but ideally, like in the ideal conditions that I picked them yesterday, I didn't really have to clean anything. There might be a tiny little fleck of bark here and there that kind of grew into the flesh and the cap. But honestly, I've eaten so much little bits of trees now at this point, it like doesn't even concern me. for the most part. At least with oysters. I don't know.
Maybe there's a kind of tree I'm not considering that produces a mushroom I haven't picked yet, and that kind of tree might be toxic. I don't know. This is not a blanket piece of advice.
But I've not had an issue. What I was going to say is that, yeah, you take the mushrooms home, you clean them, you want to store them in a good way to store them is like a paper bag in the fridge. Sometimes I will store them outside if it's cold enough. You don't want it so cold that they freeze because then their texture will change. They'll like get mushy potentially. I mean, that's not the end of the world because you can freeze and preserve your mushrooms if you want. Or yeah, there are options. There's so many ways. The point is, when you are cutting up, cleaning, preparing your mushrooms, save the little bits of the end of the stipe that's like maybe tougher than you would like for eating, and the parts that have like lots of the bark in them. Pretty much any part of the mushroom that you save, you can either start a culture of your own, they call it the burrito method, or take those bits. They make great compost, but it may not be a big volume of it on its own. So I like to, like, if nothing else, throw them back out in the wild or like underneath a mulch pile, like under like the leaves if you live next to a wooded area, something like that. Basically, you are returning like live and active parts of that mushroom species or the fungal species back into the wild to like keep spreading and growing. You're helping it out. You're helping it accomplish its original goal is to Veni Vidi Vici. Veni Vidi Vici. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's definitely not it. I don't know how good this looks on a video, but fried up these tasty mushrooms in a plantain infused olive oil that I made. Damn, it feels good to be a gangster. Oh man. Plantain and something else. I honestly don't remember. It might have been calendula. This won't focus to save my life. Wow. Yeah. And then I also use the greens from these really sweet turnips I grew in my garden. There's one big piece of raw broccoli raw raw, like a sweet basil dressing. There's cilantro in there. There's Parmesan under the mushrooms, which I realize now I messed up. I should have done the cheese last, both because it would look better. It wouldn't just look like a pile of crap. And then the cheese might have melted over the hot mushrooms and radish greens. And there's turnip greens. There's little bits of those French radishes in here. I love sauteing those. And a big dollop of cranberry sauce. I don't know how that's going to taste in a salad, but I made the cranberry sauce myself. It's lightly sweetened with honey and apples. It's bangerang. All right, bye. I'm going to eat.